Hello and welcome to our program Chop Suey on Shabbat, How American Jews Embrace Chinese Food. And to those who celebrate, a happy fourth night of Hanukkah. At this challenging time for the Jewish community and in the world, it is good to be here tonight with you and to share the light of learning together. My name is Rachel King. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center at American Ancestors. For those of you who are new to us, the Jewish Heritage Center is a research and educational center dedicated to collecting, preserving, and illuminating Jewish history and heritage. Our archives contain millions of items documenting Jewish individuals, families, businesses, and institutions throughout New England. And these collections are used by researchers from all over the world. The Jewish Heritage Center also offers public programming and educational resources for wide audiences. We are part of American Ancestors in Boston, a national nonprofit center for family history, heritage, and culture. So before we get started with tonight's program, I just want to give you a few housekeeping notes. You in the audience will be muted throughout the webinar, but we do welcome your questions. You can type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen during the presentation or during the Q&A session just after the presentation, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can. We've just had a little technological glitch on our end, so if there are any glitches on either end, you can watch the full recording of this session afterward. Tonight's presentation comes out of a new research fellowship at the Jewish Heritage Center. The Professor Ronald C. Curhan and Joan Pokross Curhan Research Fellowship. This fellowship enables a scholar at the beginning of their career to conduct research in the Jewish Heritage Center's archival collections. We are deeply grateful to longtime supporters and friends, Ron and Joan Curhan, for their commitment to scholarship and to the preservation of American Jewish history, and especially for their interest in supporting scholars at the beginning of their careers. It is my great pleasure now to welcome our speaker this evening and the inaugural Curhan Research Scholar. Shiyong Liu is a joint PhD candidate in the history and in the history and Hebrew and Judaic Studies departments at New York University. Her research explores the diverse interactions between Jews and Chinese in America, with a focus on food and business. She is a Mellon predoctoral fellow at Women's and Public History at the New York Historical Society, where she has curated an exhibit based on her research that it's open now, and it runs through April of 2026. Shiyong is also the 2025-2026 Sid and Ruth Lapidus Fellow at the Center for Jewish History in New York. This summer, Shiyong visited the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center here in Boston to do research in our collections, and tonight you will hear about some of what she discovered in the archives. Based on the number of you in our audience tonight, this topic is a popular one, and we are so pleased to bring Shiyong and her groundbreaking research to a wide audience. Please join me in welcoming the Jewish Heritage Center's 2025 Curhan Research Scholar, Shiyong Liu.
Rachel, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much for having me tonight. I want to express my gratitude to Joan and Ronald. Your generous support will greatly benefit future graduate students and emerging scholars in the field, and I am honored to be the first recipient of your research fellowship. And I also want to thank everyone at the Wyner Family Jewish Heritage Center. Doing research in the archives is often a lonely, exhausting journey, but accompanied with your assistant, I had a truly wonderful summer this year. And Hanukkah Sameach to everyone joining us tonight. I hope you stay well, stay warm, and stay safe. To continue the holiday mood, let's talk about something fun and tasty, which you all are very familiar with. But I'm going to push the beginning of the story way back to the turn of the 20th century, tracing how Jewish women and men in Boston and New York respond to the tremendous popularity of Chinese food and how kosher Chinese cuisine as a distinctive cultural phenomenon developed in both cities. So one question I often receive is, how did it happen, the story between American Jews and Chinese food? Well, I will need to answer this seemingly simple question with my whole dissertation, but I would like to highlight one significant factor, among others, in making this story happen. That is the story of Chinese restaurateurs to attract Jewish customers. Owners of Chinese restaurants started to advertise in the Jewish press at the beginning of the 20th century. This happened even earlier in Boston than in New York. In 1907, a Chinese restaurant named Hankou announced its opening in the Jewish Advocate. Besides food and cleanliness, the restaurant highlighted its featured ladies' private dining room. And Chinese restaurants in New York advertised in both English language and Yiddish Jewish newspapers. All of the examples attached here show that Chinese restaurants at the time were not just modest storefronts. We are actually talking about Michelin-level, upscale Oriental palaces, in which you can often find the best dancing bands of the town. So not surprisingly, they were popular among especially young Jews. And that raised concerns for some Yiddish journalists in New York in the late 1920s. Mordechai Danzis, editor of Der Talk, which was a major Yiddish daily in the 20th century, wrote an article titled, Die Melchome zwischen Chopstick und Gefilte Fisch. For Danzis, 90% of dancers at the Chinese restaurants are Jewish sons and daughters. No, this is not good. And it became even more problematic that Jews now prefer Chinese food over traditional Jewish dishes. Yet, despite his provocative title, Danzis did not turn against Chinese food or Chinese restaurants. Instead, he implied that Jews themselves were unable to resist the glamour of new things. Nevertheless, other Yiddish journalists in New York consider eating Chinese food as a way to demonstrate their Americanization. Heyman Simo, a forward journalist, suggested in his article, Chinese Food for Americans, that the desire for exotic food is a peculiar American phenomenon. Therefore, he encourages his readers to try some real Chinese dishes in order to be more American, even though those contain forbidden ingredients such as pork and lobster. He gave the need to present Americanness, which in this case equal to display your gastronomic erudition, priority over keeping alive some of the old traditions. Thus, in the writing of New York Yiddish journalists, food became an embodiment of identity. Gefilte fish and chopstick symbolized the two identities that Jewish immigrants sought to incorporate. Whether Jewish immigrants and their children stuck to the traditional homemade Jewish dishes, or whether they find Chinese cuisine more appealing, indicated what kind of identity and values they held dear most, and what seems now in danger. Such debate, however, was absent in Boston. While Danzis was troubled by young Jews' obsession with dancing in the Chinese restaurants, around approximately the same time, the Jewish Advocate of Boston highlighted that Joan, an acclaimed Bostonian Jewish band leader and songwriter in the first half of the 20th century, actually introduced the idea of having dance floor to Chinese restaurants in Boston, which turned out to be a success from the start. The relative laissez-faire attitude of Bostonian Jews toward Chinese restaurants may be due to local Chinese restaurants' efforts to learn about Jewish culture. Hong Fa-Lo, for example, sent a New Year greetings to Jewish friends in October 1929, which apparently responded to Rosh Hashanah rather than January the 1st. In the New York Yiddish press, the debate over Chinese food went on in the 1930s and received growing interest from the general public as well. Journalists, both Jewish and non-Jewish, started to write anecdotes on this topic. The so-called Min Aaron kosher Chinese restaurant in New York was actually made up by Henry Louis Mencken, a renowned American journalist. And he even made and sent fake name cards of this restaurant to people's mailboxes, which adds some kind of the authenticity to the story. Another article in the forwards claimed that chop suey was co-created by a Jew from Kirtland named Hyman Bretner. Such anecdotes might be fake, but they suggested that the two immigrant groups in New York, Jews and Chinese, might establish a collaboration between their foodways rather than turning against each other. Meanwhile, with or without debate over Chinese food in the local press, Jewish women, the matriarchs who were actually in charge of the kitchen and decided what a Jewish home should look like, never turned down Chinese food. Of course, they also have concern over consuming Chinese food, but unlike their male co-religionists, the question for them was not to eat or not to eat. Instead, they were thinking about how to eat, when to eat, and where to eat. Starting in the late 1920s, Jewish women in Boston and New York attempt to cook Chinese food by themselves. And you can see that they were doing this based on their own culinary experience because they had not yet used stir-fry, the iconic Jewish cooking techniques in these early recipes of chop suey. And to avoid the question of kashrut or the dietary laws, Jewish women either limited their meat choice to chicken and steak, which they could get from trustworthy kosher butchers, or they went with the vegetarian version. You can find a vegetarian chop suey recipe in Nina Brown's Kookbook for Gesundheit, which means cookbook for health. Not only did Jewish women consider chop suey a healthy dish, for them it was also an economic strategy, especially during the Great Depression. As one female columnist wrote, "Chop suey will make your meat go a long way." Chop suey products produced by Asian food companies made it much easier for Jewish women to cook Chinese food at home. By the late 1930s, Jewish grocery stores in Boston and New York listed chop suey products in their ads. Among the ones that frequently appeared were the Fuji Trading Company, founded by Japanese-American Shinsaku Nagano in Chicago in 1912, and the Choi, founded by Korean-American Ian New in 1922. The Hans Food Products Company of Brighton, Massachusetts, founded by Stephen Hahn in the early 20th century, likely cultivated a good Jewish clientele, for it contributed $33 to the campaign of Associated Jewish Philanthropies in 1933. Besides attempts to cook chop suey at home, Jewish women in Boston and New York also moderate the issue by drawing a line between home and outer world. They kept kosher at home while dining out at Chinese restaurants, often once per week on Friday nights or Sundays. This became a common practice for many Jewish families by the 1950s. Molly Peacock, queen of the Yiddish theater, was reported in favor of roast pork at Chinese restaurants. Sherry Turkle, the renowned sociologist and writer, vividly records how her grandma sustained a strict kosher-style kitchen, yet allowed her family to have pork only at Chinese restaurants, which she herself ordered. Such treatment granted pork a new social meaning for many Jewish families, as Turkle brilliantly summarizes. The pork in Chinese restaurants marked the world outside of our home. But still, Jews who observe traditions more strictly found division between keeping a kosher home and eating treif outside unsatisfied. Joey Sherman, the acclaimed lawyer and an active member of the Boston Jewish community, records how his mother tackled the issue by keeping 3 sets of dishes at home, one of which is for Chinese food only, and she put the one for Chinese food in the basement of their house. Jewish women also revolutionized Jewish home cooking, bringing more Chinese dishes with their culinary creativity and inspirations from Chinese restaurants. The Temple Beth El's Sisterhood cookbook included a recipe of Chinese-style spare ribs, in which pork ribs are substituted with veal or lamb breast. Kosher certification of Asian ingredient companies in the late 1950s and 60s provided Jewish women with Chinese ingredients and vegetables that are necessary for Chinese cuisine, and to some extent also legitimized cooking Chinese food in a Jewish kitchen. The Kosher Product Directory, published by Orthodox Union, had a separate chow mein section listing mushroom chop suey and bean sprouts produced by the Hans Food Products Company. La Choy, certified kosher by the OK Labs in 1966, soon advertised in their talk and Jewish Advocate their full line of kosher Chinese products, including bamboo shoots, noodles, water chestnuts, sweet and sour sauce, and 2 kinds of soy sauce. For those who had already engaged in the kosher deli business, they further blurred the division through the melding of kashrut with the flavor and style of Chinese cookery, thus allow their hesitant, observant customers to enjoy Chinese food as well. Solomon Burstein, owner of the pioneering Burstein on Essex Street, set up a team with 2 Chinese chefs, a rabbi, and a Jewish woman who had expertise in traditional Jewish cooking to design the restaurant's groundbreaking kosher Chinese menu. Eventually, they came up with a menu just like the one you can find in Chinese restaurants, but with dishes like barbecued kosher spare ribs with duck sauce, egg fouillon with chicken liver, and chow mein bursting, in which they replaced pork with steak, chicken, and chicken liver. All dishes created and prepared by Burstein's staff were under strict supervision of Rabbi Samuel Walking, who himself was the head Orthodox rabbi in Shanghai during World War II, arranging papers to help thousands gain freedom from the Nazis. After he came to the US, he led an Orthodox Jewish congregation in Queens. Burstein and his staff endeavored to immerse their restaurant in a recognizable, authentic Chinese atmosphere, but with a Jewish twist. In the most direct way, the restaurant had a Chinese name in Chinese characters. The name 琥珀先生, a Chinese translation of the word bursting, literally means mist amber in English. And Burstein put the Chinese name alongside the English name on the restaurant menu and delivery van. In a later version of the menu, Burstein inserted images of the Kaifeng Synagogue and its memorial stela. What's more interesting is that the restaurant was one of the very few non-Chinese members of the Chinese American Restaurant Association of Greater New York. Burstein also hired Chinese waiters and cooks. And you can find a commercial advertising video clip that the restaurant made in the 1970s on YouTube, in which you can see Chinese cooks preparing behind the counter and Chinese waiters wearing black tassel skull cap. And I include that clip in the presentation.
The kosher Chinese meal. It's at Bernstein's on Essex Street, where East meets East. A curious, unlikely mixture. Yes, but it seems to work. Maybe that's the secret of New York.
According to a contemporary commentator, the Chinese waiters will greet customers with "Was machst du?" which means "How are you?" in Yiddish. It is clear that Bernstein's goal is not to simply copy a Chinese restaurant, but to create a new dining place that is born out of cooperation between the two cultures. Like the restaurant's famous saying, "When West meet East, for a Chinese fest, and kashrut is guaranteed." While Bernstein on Essex Street enabled observant Jews to enjoy the same privilege and pleasure of eating out in a Chinese restaurants, just like all other Americans did, Jewish women further defined kosher Chinese cooking at home. They studied Chinese cookery, managed to make Chinese dishes strictly kosher and authentic, and created a series of kosher Chinese recipes alone or under the help of Chinese women. The first Chinese kosher cookbook, published in 1963, came out of a Brooklyn Bobby's endeavor to save her Shabbat family dinner. Grandma Slipkov decided that traditional Jewish food mustn't remove her family from her table. And she amazed her grandchildren, Ruth and Bob Grossman, by bringing out a real Chinese meal with wonton soup, Jewish chow mein, and for dessert, the age-old Chinese restaurant favorite, pineapple chunks pierced with toothpicks. Starting from that achievement, Grandma Slipkov asked everyone she could to collect Chinese recipes. And with her great natural talent as a cook, she figured out a way to make her grandchildren's favorite dishes kosher. Eventually, the fearless matriarch visited Chinatown along with her family. She brought 2 pairs of chopsticks with her, one for meat and the other for dairy, just as kashrut required. Her efforts laid the foundation for the young Grossman's publication. All recipes in the cookbook were certified kosher by Rabbi Norman Siegel. Grossman's Chinese kosher cookbook received national attention. It was well received by Jewish communities across the country and even in Australia. Bookstores in New York, Chicago, Minneapolis, Sydney, and Detroit began to advertise the book in long term. Enthusiastic book reviews soon appeared in various major Jewish newspapers. Even the New York Times reviewed the book, suggesting the book's reputation has gone beyond the Jewish community. And indeed, the book was so popular that Bob Grossman published a new version in 1978, adding new recipes adapted from the increasingly popular Sichuan and Hunan spicy dishes. The book's popularity came not only from Grandma Slipkov's creative recipes, but also due to its efforts to show that traditional Jewish cuisine can also be cosmopolitan, creative, and interesting. The Grossman named their recipes with a mixture of Chinese and Yiddish words, like vegetable omelette gibakik, which means give a look. When describing the fried wonton rapsine recipe, the Grossman said, "First comes the kreplach, also called wonton, also called ravioli, depending on your neighborhood. And in the pork section, nothing is included except a grandma with strong eyebrows saying, 'You should buy your turn.'" And my favorite recipes are the shrimp puffs and shrimp toast, in which Grandma Slipkov used gefilte fish as a substitution, which make perfect sense. The next influential kosher Chinese cookbook is the fruit of cooperation between a Jewish woman and a Chinese woman. Millie Chan's Kosher Chinese Cookbook, published in 1990, is the first kosher Chinese cookbook written by a Chinese woman. While teaching cooking class at Feinstein High School, Chan met Helen Nash, an observant Jewish woman who is very interested in Chinese cooking and is herself author of several popular kosher cookbooks. And I also want to say Nash just passed away recently, so may her memory be a blessing. So Nash introduced Chen to Jewish dietary laws and invited her to give cooking classes at 92nd Street YMHA in 1981. Chen continued to study kashrut under Rabbi Mark Engel and his wife Gilda. Her kosher Chinese cooking classes became extremely popular, eventually leading to Chen's kosher Chinese cookbook. In Boston, the process of having specialized kosher Chinese restaurants came relatively slower. Not until 1994 did Vard Harbonim certify 2 Chinese-owned restaurants as kosher. One was Shalom Hunan, and the other was Shanghai Delight, both located on Harvard Street in Brookline. But long before that, since the 1960s, kosher caterers in Boston more or less will offer some Chinese dishes. It's like you have to at least know how to cook egg rolls and chop suey in order to cater kosher in Boston. But in New York, since the 1970s, kosher Chinese restaurants have spread rapidly across the city. Here are just a few popular spots from the late 20th century. Some of them are no longer open, but some still do. Like the Buddha Bade in Chinatown. Today, most kosher Chinese restaurants most kosher Chinese restaurants in New York cluster in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, because of its flourishing Orthodox Jewish community. The birth of kosher Chinese cuisine adds new meanings to the word liberty from the perspective of food. Through the collaborative efforts of Jewish and Chinese food purveyors, the separation between home and outer world, division within the American Jewish community, and borders of different ethnic groups are broken down. I want to end my presentation with a quote from Grossman's cookbook because I think it best summarizes the spirit of generations who made kosher Chinese cuisine possible. To Grandma Slipkov, who held her first pair of chopsticks at 80. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiyong. Just before we get to questions from the audience, I want to let folks know about 2 upcoming webinars from the Jewish Heritage Center. Imagining Early American Jews on February 17th, and How Jewish Women Built Community Through Music on March 19th. You can learn more about these on our website, jewishheritagecenter.org. And since we're focusing on food and history tonight, I also want to let you know about an in-person event in Boston with American ancestors on January 10th, Recipes and Remembrance, Preserving Family Food Traditions. You can learn more about that at americanancestors.org. So now let's turn to the audience's questions. Just as a reminder, you can submit questions by clicking on that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Shiyong, it's so fascinating, the borrowing across both cultures, really, the adaptations to, as you call them, the foodways, and how ingredients and cooking styles and dietary laws were being shared across both. So it's such a fascinating history. And of course, so many people have memories of family traditions around Chinese food. It is no accident that we are having this program this evening, a week before Christmas, because, well, maybe you can tell us about the tradition of Chinese food on Christmas.
Well, that is usually the most common comment I receive from audience. They will share with me their stories of having Jewish food, having Chinese food, and a movie night on Christmas. It's like a tradition for many Jewish families. But actually, the link between Chinese food and Christmas for American Jews is a relatively recent cultivation. So the very first mention of this phenomena is from a Chinese restaurant in New Jersey. So there was a Chinese restaurateur in New Jersey. He prepared chop suey dinners and gifts to a Jewish orphanage in Newark, and the New York Times described it as a fascinating story, making you feel like that kind of story only happened in America. And then we know about the famous saying by Justice Kagan about when she was asked, "Where are you on Christmas?" And she said, like all Jews, I was probably at a Chinese restaurant. And the forwards praised her for giving the Congress its most Jewish moment ever. And it's like, but it's rather a late 20th century phenomena, and it became like it revived in recent social media, and it's like it's a lovely creation.
There are several people commenting that they own the cookbooks that you were sharing and have had them for many decades. I'm sure they've been passed down through the generations. A couple of people are asking if you can take us back to that earliest moment, and you did say that you found documentation of Chinese restaurants starting to advertise to the Jewish community around the turn of the 20th century, it sounds like. But what was it that Chinese restaurateurs saw in the presumably Jewish immigrant or largely immigrant population that made them think of cultivating them as customers?
No, that's a hard question. I really want to answer it. Like, I'm still finding answers to that question in my dissertation, but I can offer several series. So first, Jews and Chinese immigrants, when they came to the United States, they often lived side by side, which possibly form initial encounters between the two communities. And then from the Chinese newspaper perspective, I do find some Jewish business, like the Jewish grocery, Jewish grocers or Jewish rice traders, actually advertise in Chinese newspapers, offering products and services to Chinese restaurants. And also you have some Jewish insurance merchant, how do you say that? Like engage in the insurance industry, or Jewish lawyers work with Chinese restaurateurs in the early 20th century, because Chinese immigrants, even though they after they came to the United States, they still need to expect. So according to the Chinese Exclusion Act, only 5 groups of Chinese immigrants can stay in the United States, but that's not the end. You still need to report to immigrant officials, and because they often like this, they are so suspicious that you are not actually authentic merchants. So they want white witnesses to prove that you are actually doing business, that you are not a laborer, which is excluded by the immigration laws. So among some popular white witnesses, you can find Jewish lawyers and Jewish merchants. So there are all kinds of initial interactions between Chinese merchant and Jewish merchant, which I think very likely when the Chinese restaurant want to advertise to a wider audience, that make them think about Jewish presses.
Okay, thank you. Many comments and questions here. Let's see. Well, we have an early one from Rabbi Rosalind. do you think one of the appeals of Chinese and other Asian food is the fact that Fleischig and Milchig is not mixed? Of course, the meat is not kosher, but to the naked eye, the absence of milk products makes the food look appealing and kosher-like is sort of the question. Did that the absence of dairy in most Asian food or Asian cuisines was that something that lent itself well to Jewish
Yeah.
cuisine?
So, yeah, there's a very interesting term coined by two sociologists um, that describe Chinese food as safe trade because you don't have the mixture of meat and dairy and for some Jews because you mice the forbidden ingredients like in very small pieces and you cannot tell whether it's like forbidden or whether it's trade or not, and that become invisible for some Jews. So that's a popular opinion of why Chinese food became appealing to Jewish customers. But also, so from if you look into the recipes of Chinese dishes, um, because kosher meat usually you need it usually include the four parts of like beef, and it's not so tender compared to the more popular cuts. And the traditional way to deal with that kosher meat is either roasting or making meat stews. So Chinese cooking, the stir fry technology, the stir fry technique, and cut meat in like really thin slices, offer a new way to treat kosher meats. So I think it offer inspirations for Jewish women, especially.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, a couple of people are asking if there's any connection with during World War II when Jews were in that period when Jews were moving to Shanghai, Harbin, and other parts of China. Was there any sort of influence, between the Jews in China and what was happening in the United States around food?
I really want to say yes, but not actually so far from my research. But because back in Shanghai, Jews doesn't like the Jewish community of Shanghai, they don't have a lot of contacts with local Chinese community. So I think like because of that experience in China, it might have like limited influence on what's happening in the United States regarding food. I feel like the story of American Jews and Chinese food is in most part it's a distinctive American story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We have some comments and memories about Chinese food being served for special occasions and in different locations. So Rabbi Rosalind again comments, after my rabbinic ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in 2003, we served kosher vegetable Chinese food from a restaurant in downtown Philadelphia, FYI. She also recalls, after moving to Israel, there was so much disappointment that the Chinese restaurants that once existed are entirely no more. Did the tradition here eventually translate to Israel, or have you not gotten that far yet?
Actually, it did. Like, it's very interesting. I found some really interesting sources. So because there are not so many Chinese immigrants in Israel in the early years. So what Israeli know about Chinese food actually come from United States. And also you have, there's a cookbook by the Fern family, which I found at the Jewish Heritage Center this summer. So one relative actually sent a recipe of a Chinese dish to family members in Israel. So it's like it's a food exchange between United States and Israel, but in through the vehicle of Chinese food.
Yes, yes. Here are some other American locations that you might look into for your research. Annette Fromm writes, "Thank you for sharing your impressive research. By 1936, there were 2 Chinese restaurants in Miami Beach, Sun Hoi Restaurant and Ruby Foo's. The famous Paddock Club considered Chinese food their specialty starting in 1930. And we have another comment saying the same link between Chinese restaurants and Jewish patrons occurred in Toronto, Canada, as well. Here's what I consider an important question from Linda. Did the Jews and Chinese in New York have any social contact aside from the restaurants, since they lived in the same neighborhood? Did their kids make friends at school, for example? Was there sort of socialization and cross fertilization among the immigrant groups beyond in the restaurant space?
Yeah, many interesting stories. So my colleague Kimberly Chen wrote a essay on a philanthropist dinner thrown by Chinese merchants in the early 20th century. They make donation to the program happened in Eastern Europe. And there you can find stories of Chinese and Jewish immigrants living under the same same roof. And there's a interesting record at the MoCA, the Museum of Chinese in America. And so it's actually a complaint to the fireman department signed by all tenants of the same building, and you can find Chinese and Jewish signatures on that record. And from several interviews at the MoCA, Chinese immigrants mentioned they go to Jewish school and made a lot of Jewish friends. There are so many interactions happen because you have people live side by side, and it naturally happened.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Another memory from Gail. I had my Bat Torah celebration at a kosher Chinese restaurant in Brooklyn in the mid-1970s. I remember my grandmother enjoying Chinese food, but can't remember if my great-grandmother would try it. So fascinating how you shared that, for some folks, it was important that it was fully kosher, and the restaurants and even some of the Jewish restaurateurs were making sure that the food was kosher, and then others were fine. As long as it was outside the house, it was fine if it was pork or shrimp or whatever. That reminds me of a question I wanted to ask. You mentioned that Friday night was a common night for Chinese food. Was that in the home or out at restaurants? Because in the home, wouldn't there customarily have been Shabbat observance?
Yeah, I think for some families it's dine out situation, but also you find recipes of Chinese dishes that's sort of like designed for Shabbat. I found one really interesting recipe called Shabbat in a pot, and it's a Chinese chicken stew. It's so interesting, and but I don't know that for sure, but I feel like in the 1950s and 60s, that would be a dine out at Chinese restaurant situation in general.
Interesting. We have a comment from Jonathan Sarna. Hello, Jonathan. Remember that the Jewish lawyer Max Kohler, son of a famous Reform rabbi, was a strong defender of Asian immigrants in court. He was a critical immigration lawyer for the Chinese community. See Professor Coburn's article on him. So that's, as you had mentioned in your talk, that the Jewish lawyers who were really helpful and instrumental for the community. Have you studied him and his role?
Yes, I've been looking through his papers at the American Jewish Historical Society, and I appreciate his words greatly. He's the man with big love for all peoples. Like he sympathized with Chinese immigrants, but also he think about that same. He's interested in the immigration question in general. Yeah, he's a great man.
David asks, did you find a difference in Chinese food interests between Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews?
I really want to look into that question, and I've been thinking about that for a while, because like rice is also it's the daily food for Sephardic Jews, and I actually asked question to a Sephardic Jewish professor at NYU. I'm like, I'm researching on the interaction between Jews and Chinese, and I wonder if that's similar. Do you have some story that maybe can share with me? And he's like, we actually eat rice. So, well, I didn't get. I feel like that's probably a very different experience with Chinese food and Chinese restaurants, but I will look into that. I will need to find more sources on that.
We have another memory from Dina. One of my husband's friends learned Mandarin, and we were always treated fantastically by the owner of a Chinese restaurant in New York back in the 60s. There's also this story of learning each other's language to communicate about food and just as human beings. We at the Jewish Heritage Center did some oral histories 2 or 3 years back, and there was about formerly Jewish immigrant neighborhoods in Greater Boston, and there were a number of stories of people who remembered as children sort of walking the streets of their Jewish neighborhoods, and there would be the Chinese restaurateur who would welcome people with Yiddish, as you mentioned. And one oral history narrator recalled that the beloved Chinese restaurateur in his neighborhood knew more Yiddish than a lot of people. So very, very charming and wonderful efforts to connect through language and food.
Yeah, and also I actually learned a joke from Professor Lawrence Shipman of NYU. So he mentioned at actually a kosher Chinese restaurant. So the Chinese waiters there, they speak Yiddish, and when one Jewish customer asked the owner of the kosher Chinese restaurant, how the Chinese waiter know about speaking Yiddish, and the owner said, "Don't tell him. He think that's English." So it's so cute.
That's great. Clearly, there are so many fond memories and feelings about this cross-pollination, that there are these jokes and stories and so on. It's quite fond. We have a memory from Deborah. My grandfather, actually, this has a question as well. My grandfather immigrated from Kovel, Poland to the Lower East Side, Lewis Street. I understand he wandered to Chinatown and tasted this new food. He introduced this food to my grandmother, who was American born. Did Chinese food take off right away with the new immigrants, or did it take a decade or so until the immigrants became assimilated? Do you know about that sort of timeline?
My understanding is that happened right away because the very first um, record we have about the Jewish craze for Chinese food happened came from the end of 19th century, which is almost like um, the moment when two immigrants just settled in the United States. So I feel like the early encounters happened very in at least at the end of 19th century. But the question is, the sources are so limited. We got a bunch of materials from at least the beginning of 20th century. But if you really want to chase the origin of the origin, that will need more efforts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Shelley recalls, has a memory from San Francisco, the Bay Area. Our family, along with family friends, would go to San Francisco's Chinatown every Sunday. My dad would tell our usual waiter how much he wanted to spend per person, and the waiter would bring dishes of the waiter's choice. We got to try lots of different dishes.
That's
That's
so nice. That's so
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, I love the idea of the usual waiter. Let's
Yeah.
try something new this week. So Shiyong, there are some questions here about how you got interested in this subject in the first place, and the status of your dissertation, and is it on its way to being published? And so tell us a little bit about your interest in this subject, your research process, and where you're going from here.
Hey, thank you so much for asking. That's so nice. So I got into this project actually by accident. So I started my master during COVID. So I have like no access to any physical archives back then. And I found this amazing archive called Historical Jewish Press, which you have lots of digitalized Jewish newspapers. And at the moment, I kind of know about the story of American Jews and Chinese restaurants. So I just type in Chinese restaurant in the search machine. And I found like hundreds of Chinese advertisements in Jewish newspapers in almost all cities, especially in Chicago. They have a very unique. They become a very unique case of Chinese restaurants actually. Um, so I became curious, like how did this Chinese restaurant know about Jewish newspapers, and also that advertisement appeared in Yiddish press, and how do they know about Yiddish? So I became so obsessed with that, and the literature we have so far on the story of American Jews and Chinese food usually write from the perspective of American Jews. So like scholars explore and answer like how did American Jews being attracted to Chinese food, and I feel like there's a the other side of the story. I wanted to know how Chinese restaurateurs actively participate in making this story happen. So that became the start of my research project. And I wrote a master thesis on that, and then I get into a PhD program, and I expand my research I start from Chicago, and then I add in New York, and I'm also looking at San Francisco. So each city constitute as a separate case, but also there are interconnectedness between the regions. So it's a really fascinating project, and I hope I can finish as soon as possible. Yeah. So right now I'm a ABD, and hopefully I can finish it in 2 years.
ABD meaning all but dissertation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, we certainly wish you well, and we'll be waiting with bated breath for whatever publication comes out of this. And certainly, again, congratulations on your exhibit at the New York Historical Society. This really is groundbreaking research. Again, it's something that is such a part of the culture, but it doesn't seem like it's been sort of under researched and studied. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and we really look forward to hearing more from you. One last comment from Rabbi Rosalind. Thank you for your participation, Rabbi. She writes, so enlightening, great topic, and fun to explore at a time of great sadness from the attack on yet another Jewish holiday. Thank you. So yes, as I said at the beginning, thank you for bringing us together and shedding light on the subject and bringing some light to us at this time. We appreciate your work so much. So that's all the time that we have for questions today. We hope to bring you more from Shiyong and other research fellows at the Jewish Heritage Center. I also want to thank once again Joan and Ron Curhan for their generous support of scholarship like Shiyong's. At this season of giving, we ask those of you in the audience to consider making a gift to the Jewish Heritage Center. Your support enables us to give free programming like this and helps preserve Jewish history and provide educational initiatives for many. So thank you for considering that. Thank you for joining us this evening. And once again, happy Hanukkah to everyone celebrating. We look forward to seeing you again, and goodbye until then.